Hey art nerds, so I decided to use this Grumbacher sample to make an interesting format watercolor illustration. And I did my outlines using various colored leads offered by Color Eno. So we have pink, we have green, and we have orange. And I am painting this little illustration with my Da Vinci watercolors. I really love these watercolors. And since this is kind of a funky paper to work with, I thought it would be fun to work with some really transparent watercolors that allow for a lot of glazes and aren't prone to lifting. So the first thing I did is I went ahead and I laid down a wash of phthalo blue-green and then a wash of ultramarine. And I added a little bit of extra ultramarine at the top so that we could get kind of a gradient going on. Now, the soapy texture on this Grumbacher watercolor paper means that the sedimentation is kind of unusual and kind of dirty. So I would recommend that if you're using heavily sedimenting watercolors on this paper, that you keep your layers light. Next, I add a very light transparent yellow on top of the phthalo blue, and that's going to give us a really nice fresh spring green. And I start creating shadows by doing a little bit of negative painting using the phthalo blue green. And when I say negative painting, I don't mean I have negative feelings about my painting. I mean I am painting the areas around the areas that I'm going to want to fill. I'm filling in the negative space. That's where the term comes from. You could also think of it as reverse painting, if that helps. And this is a little bit of a fiddly, tricky situation. I started out with a larger round, moved to a smaller round, and now I'm back with a larger round, and this is allowing me to kind of work around all of those details. So as you can see, I left blades of grass and clovers basically unpainted. Once that dried, I added an all-over wash of the same cool influence yellow that I'd used to paint the grass at the top. The combination of the two, when we layer them, is going to have a nice kind of transparent green effect, a very fresh sort of green. I'm even painting in the shadow layers because I am trying to build up color and depth of tone. Now I use that same yellow as well as the warmer yellow in the palette to paint my golden little bumblebee. And then I start adding shadows onto the sunlit grass using the phthalo blue. I'm also adding shadows back into the shadowy grass just so that we have a lot of depth. We have a lot of perspective, atmospheric perspective going on. Generally, warm colors come closer to you and cool colors seem to recede. This is a cellulose paper, so it dries very quickly. But again, you really aren't going to be able to get a lot of layers on this. So if you are using the Grumbacher watercolor paper, keep it light, keep it friendly. I also used the same phthalo blue, except very watered down, to go ahead and paint some cool shadows on Kara. This makes it look as though she is in the grass. And I'm continuing to do some negative painting to continue to develop that space. I'm painting in some of my darker shadows. And I mixed up a black using the burnt umber and several of the blues, probably the Quin magenta as well, to create a black tone. And what I recommend if you are trying to create a black from a palette that does not have a black color is you use contrasting colors to get a neutral color, and then you just work progressively darker. I've mixed up a skin tone from yellow ochre and the red scarlet color, the vermilion kind of color, to make a nice peachy skin tone. And I used a very watered down version of their light warm red to paint the blush on her cheeks. I apply blush to her cheeks. I apply it beneath her nose. I apply it underneath her jaw, on her elbows, palms of the hands, knuckles on the fingers, inside of the hand. Any of those sort of places would get a little bit of vermilion, and that just helps keep the character looking alive and lively. I used a little bit of the phthalo blue to add shadow to the bee. It's going to create a contrasting shadow, but it's also going to fit within the piece a little bit better. And as layers dry, I will add more of the skin tone layers to her skin. We're trying to develop some depth. And I use the burnt sienna to paint her hair. I started with a really watered down version because I am creating contrast, I'm creating shadows, and to do that I have to start light and work my way darker. I also use the magenta color, I want to say it's a quin magenta, but it might be an alizarin crimson, to paint her shawl. I wanted something that would contrast with the grass, but it wouldn't stand out too much. Now as layers dry, I continue to add additional layers. So like on the hair, since her hair is dried, I'm working with a more saturated layer of burnt sienna. And the burnt sienna in the Da Vinci set is a really lovely color. I'm using the lighter yellow for the base of her dress, and I'm going to paint in the shadows of the dress using the warmer yellow as kind of my base tone. And although we're working in time lapse, this took about an hour and a half total time to paint. The thing about watercolor is since it takes time to dry, and since you're doing so many layers and it may take a while to build up contrast, you really need to be patient with yourself and patient with your paper. Cellulose papers tend to dry a little bit quicker than cotton rag papers, but they can't take as many layers, and colors may not look as beautiful and sort of reflective, prismatic, or chromatic as the colors might look on a higher quality paper. Kara's eyes and her hair are the same color, so I'm using the same burnt sienna to fill in her eyes. Alright, this piece looks just about done. I'm going to pull in a few tighter details using the phthalo blue. I did have the option to ink it, but I decided not to this time. I sort of like how this is a loose, light, lineless watercolor. You don't have to make everything super tight and super detailed. You can leave things light and fun. It can always be just a doodle. And I use ultramarine blue to add little dots of detail. I like adding surface patterns to Kara's clothing when I do standalone illustrations, since that's not entirely feasible, or it's often not feasible when I'm painting her clothing in the comic itself. So it's fun to add these sort of details here and there. And I think for this piece I ended up spending the most time kind of rendering the grass, creating a believable, inhabitable atmosphere. I really love painting my tiny Lilliputian character in these sort of situations. I guess because it seems like a fun escape. I create art as a form of escapism, and I create art for others who are maybe looking for a very easy, simple little escape. Not too many worries. So I try to create atmospheres that are relaxing to be in and enjoyable to be in. My recommendation is if you're going to create a comic, it should be in a world that you would like to spend time in, because you're going to end up spending a lot of time there, like it or not. And I apologize that my head is in the shot so much. I am aware of it. I know it is very distracting for some people, but my eyesight is really poor, and that means I have to be basically on top of what I'm painting. So kids, take care of your eyes. You only get one pair of them. I use a little bit of white gouache to add some white highlights and white details, just to help pop the contrast and make it look like it's a sunlit sort of scene. And I believe I'm using M grams white gouache, but honestly I should have used the titanium white in the Da Vinci set because it is nice and very opaque. It is an excellent white watercolor for adding those sort of details. Alright, so that is just about it. I want to thank you guys so much for helping me paint this piece. If you guys are looking for more tutorials, stick around. Consider checking out my watercolor basics series here on the channel and over on the blog. If you like what I do and you want to help me do it, make sure you hit subscribe and click the bell notification so you never miss an art tutorial. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys again really soon. Bye guys!